The sound seminar you're about to hear was recorded at the Poetry Center of the New York YMYWHA in November 1967. The program presents John Barth, who reads and comments on 3 unpublished sketches that he calls Test Borings for Giles Goat Boy. Mr. Barth is introduced to the Poetry Center audience by the distinguished author and educator John Hawkes. Here is Professor, novelist John Hawkes.
I want to risk bringing your odium down upon me by telling you of my first experience, very briefly, with Barth's work. When his first novel appeared in 1956, The Floating Opera, I was not reading very much contemporary fiction. I was not reading very much of anything that appeared beyond the middle of the 17th century. And some years later, it was in 1960, as a matter of fact, I asked a friend what I ought to make a great point of reading from those limbo years, and I was told repeatedly that I ought to read The Floating Opera. I thereupon scoured the bookshops and found it impossible to get my hands on. I went so far as to appeal to Mr. Barth's editors for a copy of the book, and was told by one of them that he at one time had a half dozen, but that his copies of The Floating Opera had a way of disappearing from his shelves. They were stolen quite openly and quite crassly, which I take to be a great compliment, perhaps the greatest that can be paid to a writer. When finally I managed to get a copy of The Floating Opera, which was not brought out in paperback, I think, until last year, 8 years after the appearance of that extraordinary novel, I thought it remarkably good. Not at all the kind of novel of which we say patronizingly, this is the interesting first novel of a promising young novelist, but an extraordinarily finished piece of work, an amazing performance. And I use the word performance deliberately because it seems to me, and I intend to pay him great credit by the use of the term, it seems to me that in addition to being an extraordinarily good novelist, that John Barth is a magnificent performer with the form of the novel. I think that this was demonstrated again in the second novel, that by which most readers know his work, I suspect, The End of the Road, and superbly, extravagantly, with marvelous and profligate skills in the really fabulous Sotweed Factor. John Barth has been working on a book that has achieved legendary status since the publication of the Sotweed Factor, his new novel, which will be brought out in the spring of next year. Without further introduction, ladies and gentlemen, John Barth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mallow. What I'm going to read tonight quickly are 3 sketches written some years ago for a novel that's just been finished called Giles Goat Boy. The sketches are being read because they won't be in the novel, and you can't just throw the bloody things away without using them somewhere. They couldn't be used in the novel because it turned out that they were written from the wrong point of view. The hero of the sketches, the narrator of the sketches, was simply not heroic enough, nor had he the tone of voice to narrate the work that he had to do in the book proper. These sketches are longer than they will appear. I'll have to cut them to fit our time, and I'll read them with no further comment than this. Very well. Love had its place in my researches, but what a bother to take a mistress. The time for final examinations was approaching that everyone took and precious few passed. It was the 7th semester of my quest for the old sheepskin. I was anyhow past 30, years behind the others, a bachelor in my rented room with my books and instruments. No man could say what I might be asked when my turn came. All day and half the night I wore my eyes out learning everything. If my room was satisfactory, in the turret of a row house, just like its neighbors, block on block, the fellow I shared it with was not. We are paired in this quarter of the university by Westcott, the mighty computer, At matriculation time, everyone's attributes are coded onto cards, which then are matched automatically on the basis of complementation. A homely farm girl with a svelte young piece from the main mall and so forth. Not in itself a bad idea, but show me the program that hasn't its doubtful side. I came into this campus with bad eyesight and an ugly birthmark, was never robust, cursed with a gimp. All this was duly punched into my card. I signed my papers, paid my fees. The gadget riffled and clicked. I went to my lodging and found there not the comely, clear-eyed, cheerful engineer I'd rather expected, myself being given to fits of brooding and conjectures at times more brilliant than practical. In fact, I'd drawn no proper student at all, but Croker, the great black athlete, all-campus candidate, a mindless brute that ate raw hamburger at the coach's order, never wore a stitch except to go out, picked his nose, took what he pleased, urinated in the shower bath, danced and farted, rolled his eyes, bared his teeth, and had his way with a parade of co-eds. Often and often, when I had problems to think through or wanted only to rest, I would discover Croker at his business with one of the girls, perhaps a cheerleader with crimson letter on the breast of her pullover. The wretch never troubled to draw the blind. From my perch on the outside stairway, I was obliged to watch them at their rut, how the smaller pink beast feigned displeasure, even threatened alarm, how her ape of the woods merely grinned, and naked himself already had at garter and hook, put her in a trice to the fearsome Roger, whereat coy no more she'd whoop. And the worst was, we must share the same bed. Hard enough to relax in the odors of perfume and sweat while he snored and pitched beside me. More than once, when sleep at last gave respite from all thought, I would be roused by Croker's heavy arm flung over me. Caught up in prurient dreamings, he mistook me for his prey, and I must either wake him, no easy task, or lie revolted in his hug till the dream was done. Now then, he was not all bad. I never begrudged him his scholarship. Brains aren't everything. Studentdom must have its circuses. The whole body attended the games. I watched them myself, cheering with the rest. Croker was a splendid, supple animal after all, full of power and grace. It could lift my spirits to see him leap about the room, or chin on the shower rod, or lay waste half a sorority with his sable cannon. We were not always at odds. Though the smell of raw hamburger wretched me, he saw to it I never starved. Except in his most obstreperous humors, he fetched and carried virtually at my command. In return, why deny it? I filled out his scholarship forms, reconciled his bank statements, schooled him in the simplest etiquette and hygiene, not to defecate in classrooms, not to copulate on street corners, did his homework. I devised little tasks to make him feel useful and regimens to keep him fit. Sometimes I even chose his girls, for left to himself, he'd as lief mount somebody's poodle or the dean of studies. Let a bright young baggage from theater arts refuse me her company or turn away from my port wine mark and thick eyeglasses, I would point her out to Croker on the sly, and by week's end have the pleasure of seeing her boggle at his awful tup. In sum, he could not have survived long in the university without my help, and I, in turn, would have found life insupportable had Croker been shot to death, say, by the father of some ruined sophomore, or lynched by the White Students' Council. However much, then, I might despair at his grossness, and he perhaps at my inhibition and relative frailness, however much we each might yearn at times to live alone or with a roommate more congenial, we at our best muddled through strange bedfellows who in any case were bound by the strictest of leases which our landlord would not break before its term. And so strong a thing is custom, I soon could not recall having ever lived without him. It was as if we'd been together from the beginning, for better or worse. What is more, if our relation was at best uneasy, we came more and more to depend on each other as time went by. My affliction, a kind of infantile paralysis, worsened. I took to a wheelchair. Croker delivered me to and from classes, even learned to take dictation and type out reports. For his part, he had got along before by a kind of instinct which, when he saw how better he fared with my assistance, he either put by or clean forgot. I wrote out his answers to quizzes, told him what and when to eat and how to dress, made quite a presentable monkey of him, all things considered. I even learnt the art of football for his sake and tutored him between matches in his fort, the Belly series. all which the professors, athletic directors, and students came to accept, grudgingly or not. To get Croker, they had to take me. To get me, who had my own kind of scholarship and notoriety, they must put up with Croker. It was a package deal. We were inseparable as two old fags or ancient spouses. Let them poke what fun they would at my poor eyes that led me into cul-de-sacs and wrong toilets. Some things I saw even then more clearly than most did. The first principle of university life, for example, I clasped to my heart during freshman orientation and never lost sight of after, not for an eye blink of time, how clamorous or brave soever the voices that denied it. On all sides one heard old platitudes and half-truths, as that the unexamined life was not worth living, that the truth should make one free, that understanding was its own reward. Cum laude graduates, even professors, were not above urging one to greater efforts with such slogans, wherefore I early decided that either, like all virtuosi, artists, athletes, yea, Croker himself, they ill understood the secret of their own greatness, or else they found it practical pedagogy to dissemble with us, as a child may best be lured from the cliff edge with promise of sweets, when in fact his rescuers are candyless and wish only to save his life. For whatever the case in academies of fancy, one thing alone matters in the real university: to avoid the torture of remedial programs and the irrevocable disgrace of failing out to the dean of flunks. In short, to pass. Except this, what has importance? Very well to preach me the therapy of swimming for my shrunken legs, or its intrinsic pleasure. Thrown overboard, I care only to reach the shore, whether by side stroke or astride a dolphin. To be sure, the examiners are above corruption and intimidation. No candidate ever bribed or threatened his way to glory. To attain it, one must know the answers. Nothing else will serve. There is the sole and sufficient reason for prizing knowledge. All other preachments are, if not mere sentiment, hollow consolation for the failed, who are ipso facto inconsolable. Get the answers by any means at all. That's the student's one imperative. Don't speak to me of cheating. To cheat could only mean to pass in ignorance of the answers, which is impossible. Otherwise, the term's empty, inasmuch as the end of passing determines all morality. What tends thereto is good, all else evil or indifferent. Nothing could be simpler in theory than the ethics of student life. But I don't suggest that the practice is without its difficulties. In the first place, no one knows for sure what he'll be asked or whether his answers will be acceptable. No two candidates are quite alike, however similarly trained, and no graduate, professors included, can know more than that he himself was asked so and so, to which on that occasion such and such reply proved acceptable. In consequence, one discovers among them numerous hypotheses about the nature of the examination, which even as an underclassman I was able to sort into two general categories. One holds that while the questions are different for each candidate, the answer is the same for all. The other, that while the question never varies, the answers do. Whether in each case the variation is from age to age or candidate to candidate, whether it's a difference in formulation only or in actual substance, whether it's radical or infinitesimal, whether the matter or the manner of the candidate's response is of more significance, the general tenor or the precise phrasing, these and 1,000 like considerations are much debated among the faculty, many of whom, one sadly concludes, are more interested in academic questions of this sort than in the ultimate ones which in principle they should prepare us to confront. The students themselves must be pardoned for being in the main more realistic, if wrong-headed. Desperate for straws, they're forever badgering their professors with down-to-campus queries. Will we be asked this in the finals? Does attendance count? How much credit's given for class participation, for extracurricular activity, for washing blackboards and beating erasers, for a neat appearance and respectful demeanor, for improvement over bad beginnings? Not a few are persuaded that independent thinking is the sine qua non, even when naive or erroneous. Others that verbatim responses from their lecture notes are what most pleases. Some of a cynic or obsequious temper openly flatter their instructor's vanity, hang on his words as on a prophet's, turn the discussion to his private specialty, slap their knees at his donnish wit, and rush to his lectern at the hour's end for further converse. What other courses do you teach, sir? Is your book out in paperback yet? The co-eds particularly are inclined to hope that a bright smile may make up for a dull intelligence, a firm bosom for a flabby argument, a clear peep for a cloudy insight. And more's the justice, not one of these gambits but has succeeded, in some cases and to some extent. Given two young ladies of equal merit and unequal beauty, who of us has not seen the fairer prosper? Who has not observed how renegade genius goes a-begging, is actually punished, while the sycophant's every doltishness is pardoned? A term's hard labor in the stacks, an hour's dalliance in teacher's car, they come to the same. Who opens her placket may close her books. She lifts her standing with her skirts. The A goes on her transcript that should be branded in her palm. Yet all this is vanity. Examiners care nothing for transcripts, only for answers. Campus legend is peopled with model students who never passed and mavericks who did. Of those tightly fleshed and loosely moraled queens, some go dressed in white gown and mortarboard to be diplomaed out of hand. Others are led shrieking down the lesser mall to be thrust beyond the pale forever. No theses so contrary that history won't feed both, and I soon induced, as might any undergraduate with both eyes open, that the whole collegiate establishment, its schools, departments, and courses of study, its professorial rank and tenure, its administrative apparatus, and its seminars, turkey pens, elms, and alma maters, was but one more or less hopeful means, the most organized, surely, and hallowed by custom, but a mere alternative for all that. Its very advantages are not without their own perniciousness. Faced with a department of moral science and one of swine research, each with budget, offices, and journals, one comes inevitably to believe in the real separateness of those subjects, as if one could fathom hogs without knowing metaphysics, or set up as a practicing ontologist in ignorance of porcinity. Worse, within the same department, one finds the Duroc Jersey men at odds with the Poland Chinas. These are pigs. The deontological intuitionalists and the axiological realists go to separate cocktail parties. Yet one must choose curriculum and major, ally oneself with Vienna Circle or Marburg School, dissertate upon the navigation of sinking vessels coastwise and celestial, or foundation planting for crook and campaneals. Alas, the finals are comprehensive. The examiners care not a fig for your sub-department of rot research. One wonders whether they know of its existence. Our schools and divisions, what are they but seams in the seamless? Our categories change with the weather, not so our fates. In vain our less myopic faculty preaches general education. They have not only the mass of their colleagues to contend with, but the very nature of the institution. Bravely today you devise something interdisciplinary, perhaps a pilot survey of post-lapsarian herpetology and pomegranate culture. Dilettantism, cry the pomologists, the natural historians, thin soup. By tomorrow there will be a department of general education with a separate division of post-lapsarian herpetology and pomegranate culture, and in time an additional division of post-lapsarian herpetology and pomegranate culture education to train instructors for the first. There's no end to it. Yet mind, I mean no disrespect for the colleges, certainly not for old New Tammany, which I loved then and love yet. Why else have I returned, in tears I grant you, like a rescued sailor to the water, in fond hope of saving others? A wart on Miss University were nonetheless a wart, and if I will not call it a beauty mark, neither would I turn her out of bed on its account. Teachers forget their business. The university does not. There is a spirit here, a wisdom in the stones, as it were, that no amount of pedantry or folly quite dispels. I hear the pledges singing in their cups, truths deeper than they know. Wander we down College Mall, old as time its elms with awe, broad as hope and dark as fate, it leads us to commencement gate. But ah, the gate is straight, and the mall is not all. Straight is the gate, and the mall not all. For those with eyes to see, the campus abounds with voiceless admonitions to humility. Not for nothing are staff and faculty equally privileged, so that groundskeepers and dormitory cooks earn as much as new professors. Not for nothing does custom decree that our trustees be unlettered peasant folk, and that they select our chancellor not from the intelligentsia, but by lot from among their kind, tinkers and tillers and keepers of shops. For the same reason one observes among the faculty not gray-beard scholars only, their cowls ablazing with exotic marks of honor, but men of the people, former merchants, aspirant statesmen, gentle carpenters, and husbandmen. It is fit that our library be more modest than our stock barns than our skating rink than our stadium. Was not Enos Enoch, the founder's son, by nature an outdoor type, a do-it-himselfer who chose as the original trustees the first dozen people he met, who never took degree or published monograph or stood behind lectern, but gathered about him whoever would listen in the buckwheat valleys or the wild rhododendron of the slope, and taught them by simple fictions and maxims proof against time, which now are graved in the limestone friezes of our halls. Not the cut of your coat, but the cut of your jib. All's fair that ends well, and the sketch ends with a prayer. Learned founder, liberal artist, dean of deans and coach of coaches, to whose memos we still turn in time of doubt, stand by us through these dark hours in academe. Teach me that am thy least professor to profess no thing but truth, that am thy newest freshman advisor, not to misadvise those minds so free of guile and information thou hast committed to my trust. Help me to grasp thy rules, make clear thy curricular patterns as the day, thy prerequisites unknot for me to broadcast with the chimes. Enlighten the stupid, fire with zeal the lowest percentile, have mercy on the recreant in main detention and the strayed in remedial wisdom. Be as a beacon in the college senate, a gadfly in the dorms. Be keg and tap behind the bar of every order, that the brothers may chug-a-lug thy lore, see truth in the bottom of their steins, and find their heads a-crack with insight. Be with each co-ed at the evening's close, paw her with facts, make vain her protests against learning's advances. Take her to thy mind's back seat, strip off preconceptions, let down illusions, unharness her from error, that she may, ere the curfew, be infused with knowledge. Above all, sir, stand by me at my lectern. Be chalk and notes to me. Silence the mowers and stay the traffic that I may speak. Awaken the drowsy, confound the heckler, bring him to naught who would digress when I would not, and would not when I would. Take my words from his mouth who would take them from mine. Save me from slip of tongue and lapse of memory, from twice-told joke and unzippered fly. Doctor of doctors, vouchsafe unto me examples of the unexampled, words to speak the wordless. Be now and ever my visual aid, that upon the empty slate of these young souls I may inscribe, bold and squeaklessly, the answers.